How's it, everyone? Welcome to another edition of my racket collection right here on OpenCourt. So today I'd like to talk about one of my rackets of choice. It's either this one or the one that I talked about previously. So today on my racket collection, I'd like to talk about the 2018 Head Graphene 360 Speed Pro. So the newest update to the Speed Pro just came out this year in 2022, and it looks almost exactly like this paint job. So not to get confused, this is the 2018 Graphene 360 Speed Pro 2 models ago. So what did Head introduce in this generation of the Speed Pro? Well, the previous generation, which was the Graphene Touch, a lot of players complained that that racket became too muted. The previous generation to that was too stiff, and so Head swung the pendulum way too far in the other direction and made the next generation extremely muted and extremely dampened so that people couldn't feel the ball on the strings. With this update in 2018, the Graphene 360, I think Head found the perfect balance of dampenness but also crisp and liveliness. They made it a little bit stiffer, so it gave players a little bit more of a response. So Graphene 360, as the name suggests, Head has distributed graphene around the head. So in the throat here at 3 and 9 on the sides, and at the top at 12 o'clock here, to give it a little bit more stability and power on impact. So here are the specs to the Graphene 360 Speed Pro. Head actually overhauled quite a bit from the previous generation in terms of specs. They made the beam 1 millimeter thicker, so it's a 23 millimeter straight beam now. And although it has the same 1820 string pattern, Head has changed the drill pattern to make it a little bit more open, so it actually gets a little bit more power and spin than previous generations, which had a tighter 1820. Head has also slightly configured the weight and balance. They made the weight about 5 grams lighter, but they also made the balance point 5 millimeters head heavier. So right now it's either between this or the 2013 model of the Graphene Speed Pro that I'm using as my racket of choice. I like both, but let's first get into the pros, what I like about the Graphene 360 Speed Pro. So the best thing about the Head Graphene 360 Speed Pro, in my opinion, is definitely the updated string pattern. They kept it in 1820, but they made it more open, which I really appreciate, because the previous editions, I thought the 1820 was way too tight. It was not getting any power and especially spin on my kick serves. And so I struggled with serving with the previous generations. But the new generation, I think, is the perfect string pattern. I've always said if the Speed Pro had an 1819 string pattern, which allowed the mains to move a little bit more, get a little bit more spin and power, it would be perfect. The Graphene 360 has still the 1820, but they made it more open, so it actually feels like an 1819 because it gets a little bit more spin, which makes it easier for me to serve and a little bit easier to get more power and spin. I still like to pair it with a thin gauge string though, because it is still technically a tight pattern. I would like a little bit more feel, and pairing it with a thin string makes it even more spinny, especially on the kick serve, which is where I look for help the most. And so I think this racket works very well with a thin gauge string or even a hybrid. I think the Graphene 360 Speed Pro has tremendous amounts of feel, and that brings me to the second thing I like most about the Graphene 360 Speed Pro is that the updated response, because the previous generation, which I also own, the Graphene Touch was way too muted. The generations before that were pretty stiff, but I actually like that kind of stiffness. It didn't bother me at all. The Graphene 360 Speed Pro is not as stiff as those generations before the Graphene Touch, but I think it's definitely more on that side of the spectrum, and so I really appreciate the crisp and firm response that I get, especially on the volleys, because I want to be able to know where exactly I'm going to hit the ball. I can hit drop shots, angles, those types of touch, feel-oriented shots a lot easier when the racket is a little bit stiffer and I get a little bit more feedback to my arm. Now getting into the cons, these are just a little bit personal for me, but I wish that Head didn't make the beam thinner. I really thought that it was perfect right at a 22 millimeter beam. It got a little bit more control. I tend to fly some balls long when I'm in a heated baseline exchange with the Graphene 360. I didn't really have that issue with the previous generations because a slightly thinner beam gets a little bit more control. Most people would just roll their eyes thinking, oh, 1 millimeter, that's not going to make a difference. It actually does. And so the 22 millimeter beam I thought was perfect. Also, they tinkered with the balance. I thought the previous generation which had a 315 gram unstrung weight with a 310 millimeter balance, I thought was perfect. I prefer a balance that is 310 or less because it swings faster. It gets me a little bit more acceleration when I'm serving, which is where I look for the help the most. And so when I played with the Graphene 360 Speed Pro to get the feel of the balance of the previous generations, I put some weight under the butt cap to make it more head-light. And so I can kind of adjust it, but I kind of wish that Head didn't tinker so much with the specs. The new string pattern was definitely appreciated, but I wish they kept it a 22 millimeter beam, and I also wish that they kept it at a 310 millimeter balance. But other than that, the Speed Pro feels great. This is still one of the best baseliner sticks on the market. I don't really think there is too much of a difference between this 2018 model of the Speed Pro and the current generation, which is the 2022 edition with the new oxidic technology. The current generation definitely packs a little bit more punch. I did demo that and I did really like it. But if you're still looking for a little bit more control-oriented stick, or you don't really want to pay $250 for a new racket, especially with the rising costs of tennis with supply chain issues, you guys can probably pick this up a little bit cheaper. But all in all, the 2018 Head Graphene 360 Speed Pro is one of my favorite sticks. It's either this one or the 2013 UTech Graphene Speed Pro that I pull out of my bag if I'm playing a competitive match. And so if you guys haven't tried it, or if you guys have tried it, let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for watching this edition of my racket collection right here on Open Court. If you guys like this content and want to see more like it, be sure you overhead smash that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you on an Open Court.